name is Frank McFarland, and I'm a family law attorney here at King Law in North Carolina. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about parental alienation, which I know is a complex and complicated issue that you may be dealing with. And some of you may be listening to this thinking that I know that parental alienation is not real. This is a made-up thing to help abusers. And others of you have maybe experienced it, and you're so confident that it is real and what you're going through is such a big issue and important topic that you want to work through. And I want to start on that line. Let me tell you a couple things that are important to know. Okay, so there was a psychiatrist who did some research on this named Richard Gardner, who came to this conclusion, and ultimately he kind of coins the term, probably more commonly that we hear in parental alienation, but parental alienation syndrome, in terms of dealing with the kind of psychological effects that something like this may have on a child. Now, what ends up happening out of that is that Richard Gardner kind of gets debunked in a lot of ways. There were a lot of different scenarios where it seemed like we're just covering up abuse through this. So I think what then happens is you have this research, and especially in the context of sexual abuse, that gets sort of, built up over time to this really negative connotation that comes with parental alienation. Now, all that said, the courts hear this too. So the courts have heard experts that say, here's kind of where this is junk science, this is not the reality. And then they've heard all this talk about how these are the real psychological effects that children go through. For purpose of the rest of this, I want you to just kind of blanket, stop and say, we don't care what this is called, but that there are real things that happen with kids when they go through a divorce, especially when they're choosing one parent over another, and there's no real logical reason. So virtually anything you will see on the modern research on parental alienation would include this language that there's no, kind of rational reason that a child would be refusing those visits, which, if you take it as true, resolves all these other issues about covering up abuse. Now, again, what are we relying on to say that it's not rational? Do we have anything other than the child to determine that? And the answer, in my experience, is typically yes, because the children don't always make these allegations. So what you have is a sect saying, well, this is not real because this was used by, sexual abuse perpetrators to kind of get out of these situations and to turn that around on somebody else. When in the vast majority of the situations that I've dealt with, there are rarely even these allegations of abuse. There are these allegations that I don't have that affection for the parent, or I have these issues with the other side. But even what they describe is normally not, it doesn't match the feelings that they show, or this lack of love and affection that they have for one party or another. And to take that a step further, the scientific community is not really split on the issue of whether or not during a divorce, one parent can influence a child over the other parent to the detriment, and they're not really split over whether or not that could have these sort of these exhibiting of these psychological effects on the child. So I think we have to be very careful when we're walking through this determination of whether it's real or not, to understand that there are very practical sides of this no matter what you call it. Restrictive gatekeeping is another name that has become popular in recent years. I don't love changing the name just to avoid this, but I think it shows you the point, and there are other names too that you will occasionally hear, but these things are just a way to kind of separate it from what Richard Gardner's research showed. And there's a lot of new kind of names in this field that come up. I follow Amy Baker a lot, in her research and her books, and they're good reads if you're going through something like this. But now, if you are dealing with parental alienation, and I know it took me 4 minutes to get to this point, but if you are dealing with this, one of the most important things that I want you to do is get your research, find out your information on it. But if you are wanting to deal with this practically, one of the first and best steps that you can take is to forget trying to define it. Forget trying to prove this parental alienation. Forget trying to blame the other party for this. Now, I'm not saying that once you get to court, there are not going to be evidence or pieces of evidence that show that the other party may be responsible for this, or the other parent, in alienating you or in preventing you from having that relationship with your child. But you're going to be in for a war when you go through this. And it is a very difficult case, and it's a very difficult case to prove. But if you can put the focus on your child, you will have a much easier time getting past this. And I want to tell you what I mean by that. you could spend tens of thousands of dollars having every expert out there come in and testify on your behalf. And from my experience, again, what I've seen here is there's a couple different forms that this takes. Some of them I think are more clear smoking gun. The other parent is telling the child things they shouldn't be saying. They are giving them, involving them in these very adult contexts, and they're doing it intentionally to try to push you out of the picture. And there are other situations where they have this genuine belief that they are the better parent for the child and that they will provide more of that quality, of life and these other aspects. And they don't maybe intentionally think that they're pushing it in that way. Not that it matters. I don't think it matters either way when it comes to the psychological impact. But we have this sort of passive versus active breakdown that kind of happens. And I think it's important when you get to court to understand that the court's going to treat something more passive differently than something more, here is the text message where the opposing party called me a piece of crap and said that, told the kid that they shouldn't care about me anymore, or whatever it might be, as you go down this line. But when you're going through it, if you can separate yourself from those things and put the focus back on the child, you'll really see a bigger picture of who actually takes the brunt of the hit in these situations, and that's the kid. So when you think about a child who's going through this, it doesn't matter what you tell them. It doesn't matter how many times you say that what they've heard is not the truth, or try to convince them that the reality is much different than the way that they perceive it. This is a mental thing. It is a psychological impact that you're not going to be able to just change, with that. So when you have this basic understanding that the child doesn't want to see you, and that's not really rational, if you take the blame game out of it, oftentimes it's much easier for both sides to agree that this is a problem that we need to resolve. And if it's a problem that we need to resolve, everybody might agree to get you into that kind of that family therapy to try to reunify, which is ultimately the type of steps that you're going to need in order to rebuild that relationship. So if everybody's in agreement, everybody's on board that we're building back up, that is a much easier case than trying to prove parental alienation by paying that same person that would be working on this reunification thousands of dollars more to come in court and try to explain why this is or isn't parental alienation without all the facts. So again, that's not a solution to everything, but the research on this topic, which is light for judges and for lawyers, is going to be pushing you in the way of, you need these depositions, you need these experts. And the truth is oftentimes that the practical side can be much different if you put the focus where it should be. And that's the way that we're going to take these steps forward. Now, I know there are tons of questions about this, and I'm trying to cram a lot into a very short period of time. But if you're going through this issue, you need a lawyer that understands it. And I know finances play a role, but you've got to start making these decisions. And if you are not getting that time and you think there are signs of parental alienation going on in your situation, you cannot wait from going to court, whether that's with a lawyer or without. You have to get this before the court, because the longer this time goes, the harder it's going to be to unwind. If you have any other questions and you'd like to talk to us more about it, we're happy to do that. So feel free to schedule in a consult with us today.